Parysatis was a woman of remarkable intelligence and relentless ambition. Her tenure as queen of the Achaemenid Empire and later as queen mother was marked by extraordinary cunning and ruthless vengeance, where she targeted anyone who stood in her way or wronged her, and she took out her vengeance in some of the most brutal ways you will ever hear about throughout history. Parysatis was married to Darius II, who reigned from 423 to 404 BC. Her ambition and strategic mind were first evidenced when she helped him secure the throne. At the time, the current king was Sogdianus, who had ascended to power through fratricide. When Xerxes II came to power, his half-brother Sogdianus murdered him in his sleep and seized the throne. While Sogdianus had the backing of several influential courtiers, the army despised him for killing Xerxes. This period marked the first major display of Parysatis' cunning and ruthlessness, traits that would dominate the Persian court for decades to come. She persuaded Darius not to engage in open conflict, but instead to diplomatically approach Sogdianus, convincing him that his position was untenable, especially without the army's support. They promised Sogdianus a full pardon if he renounced his claim to the throne and stepped down peacefully. Deceived by this offer, Sogdianus agreed, only to be swiftly arrested and sentenced to death. The method of his execution was uniquely Persian: suffocation in cold ashes. A punishment reserved for the worst of criminals, Sogdianus was placed in a tall brick tower filled with ashes. As he stood in the tower, he inhaled nothing but ash, eventually collapsing and dying of asphyxiation. This brutal execution underscored the lethal combination of Parysatis' strategic acumen and her willingness to employ extreme measures to secure her family's power. Parysatis had 4 children with Darius II, but only 2 are significant in this story. Her firstborn Arsichas and her secondborn Cyrus. Arsichas was named crown prince and heir to the throne. However, Parysatis' favourite was Cyrus. From the day he was born, she lavished him with affection and harboured ambitions for him to become the king, despite his hot-headed and borderline sociopathic tendencies. When Darius II fell ill and was on his deathbed, Parysatis begged him to name Cyrus his successor, repeatedly visiting him, but he would not relent. Thus, Arsichas became king and took on the name Artaxerxes II. But Cyrus would not give in that easily. He plotted to kill Artaxerxes before he ascended the throne. But this plot was quickly uncovered and he was arrested and condemned to death. Unwilling to see her beloved son executed, Parysatis collapsed at Artaxerxes' feet, imploring him with fervent pleas to spare Cyrus' life and instead send him back to Lydia, where he served as governor. Artaxerxes' closest advisors warned him against granting his mother's request, arguing that sparing Cyrus would only embolden him to seize the throne in the future. In what would become a hallmark of his reign, Artaxerxes relented and heeded his mother's pleas. Cyrus was sent back to Lydia, a significant province with a formidable army, where he immediately began plotting his rebellion. Cyrus raised 20,000 troops and hired 10,000 Greek mercenaries and marched on his brother. In the summer of 401 BC, the two brothers clashed at the Battle of Cunaxa. During the fierce fighting, Artaxerxes was injured and forced to withdraw from the battlefield. Meanwhile, Cyrus led the charge from the front lines on horseback. A soldier named Mithridates spotted him and hurled a spear, striking Cyrus in the face and inflicting a deep wound that knocked him off his horse. As Cyrus was being assisted, an unknown soldier thrust a spear into his leg. Cyrus collapsed and succumbed to his injuries, dying on the battlefield. When Artaxerxes learned of Cyrus' death, he dispatched his most trusted eunuch Parysatis to search for the body. Following custom, Parysatis located the corpse of the would-be king, decapitated it, and severed the right hand before sending them to Artaxerxes. Parysatis, upon hearing of her favourite son's demise, was inconsolable. She mourned for days, but her grief soon turned into a fierce desire for revenge. Determined to avenge Cyrus, she gathered every detail about the battle and the events leading to her son's death. She focused her wrath on the 3 men she held responsible: Mithridates, the unknown soldier, and Parysatis. Her first target was the unknown soldier. Parysatis' rage cannot be satiated by a simple execution, but the man who has been bragging about killing her son would die a long and horrible death. He was put on the rack for 10 days, his body stretched. They gouged out his eyes, and molten bronze was poured into his mouth and ears until he finally succumbed to his wounds. Her next target was Mithridates. He was invited to a banquet by Parysatis' eunuchs. He arrived adorned in fine clothing and jewelry that Artaxerxes had given him for his actions at the Battle of Cunaxa. As the alcohol flowed freely, Mithridates' tongue loosened, and he boasted of how he struck Cyrus in the face that day, and how it was him that landed the fatal blow. Mithridates was taken outside the city. He would suffer the ordeals of boats. Mithridates was placed inside the hull of a small boat, with another small boat placed upturned on top of him, creating a wooden shell around him. The only part of his body outside the shell was his head. Then they buried him in the ground with just his head protruding. He was force-fed food. If he refused, he was tortured until he relented. Then they also force-fed him milk and honey and poured it all over his face. This continued for days. The milk and honey attracted bees, flies, and all manner of insects that crawled all over his sunburned face and entered his mouth, ears, and nostrils. The force feeding, especially milk and honey, meant Mithridates suffered constant diarrhea. This attracted maggots, worms, and rats that started eating away at his festering body. By the time Mithridates died, much of his flesh had already been consumed by the vermin. His torment lasted 17 days. Despite first awarding these men with gifts for killing his brother, Artaxerxes could not withstand his mother and easily relented when she asked permission to kill them. But her third target, the eunuch Parysatis, was Artaxerxes' most trusted servant. Artaxerxes would never willingly hand him over, but Parysatis would have her revenge one way or the other. Parysatis bided her time and played the role of the obedient queen mother. She regularly spent time with her son and showed him affection. They frequently played dice, a game that they had often played when he was a child. During one particular game, Parysatis suggested they should wager 1,000 pieces of gold. Parysatis lost on purpose and feigned annoyance at losing the gold. She suggested they play one more time, but this time for their favourite eunuch. There would be no throwing the game this time. Parysatis played a focused game and won. Parysatis was transferred to her service, with Artaxerxes none the wiser. Parysatis did not wait long. Parysatis would die that very night. Unlike her previous victims, she could not prolong the death, and thus the agony of Parysatis, as the king would surely intervene once he discovered her intentions. So Parysatis was killed that very night by being skinned alive and his flayed skin and body being impaled. Artaxerxes was furious. He couldn't fathom how a devoted servant of the crown, whose only fault was executing the king's orders, could meet such a brutal end, all to satisfy her personal vendetta. Yet he still kept her in court as a trusted advisor, a decision he would soon regret. Parysatis was far from finished. Her next target, and most ambitious target, was Artaxerxes' wife, Cytherea. The rivalry between the two women was intense. Each sought to be the most influential woman at court, vying for greater control over the king. Both whispered venomous words into his ear, attempting to sway his opinion against the other. Parysatis once again played the long game. To quell the king's anger, she extended olive branches to Cytherea, offering gestures of peace to reduce court tensions. After some time, when a semblance of trust was established, she invited Cytherea to her chambers for a meal to further cement their cordial relationship. The bird was deftly carved, ensuring the poisoned portion was served to Cytherea. That night, she died in agony, writhing in pain. Parysatis had carefully chosen a poison that would guarantee a long and excruciating death. Artaxerxes had finally reached his limit with his scheming mother. He banished her to Babylonia, where she had extensive and luxurious estates. She could live comfortably, but was kept far away from the court. However, the king's rage was short-lived. After a brief period, he summoned her back. Upon her return to court, there was no one left to counter her influence. All her rivals and those who had wronged her were eliminated. Parysatis now had unrestricted access to the king and wielded her power for decades until she passed away at the age of 90.